This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey, Marcus House with you here, and we have a lot to cover today as always. The Starship prototype serial number 5 still awaits that 150-meter test flight, but getting very close now. Some news on the Starlink terminals and information on the rollout to the private beta beginning this summer with a public beta to follow. We had the super rapid Minotaur launch just the other day. Look at that go. And we're going to talk a little about Skylab that 41 years ago made its undignified return to Earth into parts of the Indian Ocean and Western Australia.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
The SpaceX launch site down at Boca Chica is busy at all times, even if progress on Starship serial number 5 did seem slower than we hoped this week. However, work around the site and the infrastructure itself did not slow down at all. Last week's video showed the new high bay structure is a core SpaceX focus right now. They need that high bay to stack the massive super heavy booster. If we check out the size of the mid bay already used to stack and prepare the Starship tank sections, you can appreciate the size and sheer height and volume of the new high bay structure. Now, since we're talking about the super heavy booster, there is plenty of work going on around the super heavy launch site here. As always with this sort of construction, much of the work on foundations is not visible. Seeing these massive rebar cages that form part of the foundations hints at the magnitude of this construction. There has been a lot of work on and around the SN5 where possible, of course, and we're all waiting patiently for that 150-meter hop test, which will send this baby up on the first ever full-scale Starship prototype flight, similar to what we saw in 2019 with Starhopper's test flights. This is going to be a little more interesting, with the vessel flying with a single offset Raptor engine as far as we know at this stage. As Elon Musk has previously said here, it is going to look a little odd. The animation that I shared a few weeks ago demonstrated just how odd this will indeed be. What the vessel will need to do is fly with an offset thrust to compensate for the center of mass not being lined up with the engine position here. To do that, it'll be flying at an angle like this to keep stable. It is unclear at this point whether SN5 will ever have further flights if it does complete that first 150-meter flight successfully. The static fire tests are still coming, of course, but we look to be heading now rapidly towards that test flight. It sure is going to be interesting to see from the new cameras mounted on Starhopper. I do hope that we get quite the show from all of these cameras in the future, especially for the first prototype with aerodynamic surfaces and 3 Raptor engines, which could perhaps be the SN8 or SN9, depending on how we are counting now. It may look just a little like this. Now, we did have some stacking action early in the week with the nose cone here placed on top of these ring segments. This combined structure will make up the fairing portion of the Starship. This new section would be fitted on top of a Starship tank section such as we see with serial number 5 and also serial number 6 still sitting in the mid-bay. A nose cone here also appeared out from the production tent, so there is no shortage of nose cones for the vessels in progress right now. Thanks to Mary, aka Boca Chica girl with NASA Spaceflight, for continued efforts capturing all this footage. Also RGV aerial photography, amazing work there, and it's going to be interesting watching all of this continue as we ramp up for that first historical flight. We also sadly say farewell to the old Mark II Starship as shown here by Julia. This has been laying around ever since production at Boca Chica really started taking off. John here sharing a sky view of the vehicle in the process of being deconstructed as well. Rest in peace, Mark II. While on the topic of Starship, Matthew Kerbal here just the other day published a mind-blowing simulation using SpaceX's Starship design with Kerbal space program. This has been done in the same style as the Interplanetary Transport System video from 2016. I just love seeing what the community comes out with here, and for those that are interested in seeing more or doing a simulation of their own, head over to Matthew's channel there and get in touch. He excels himself with every little detail on many of these recreations, right down to the decals on the launch vehicles and the launch sites. Now, if you want to know a little more about what to expect from this 150-meter test flight, there are some similarities with what we saw here last year with Starhopper. While you're here, of course, consider subscribing if not already, and tapping that like button certainly helps YouTube's algorithm to further promote my content. There is loads more news coming, not only with Starship development here, but with Crew Dragon's return from the International Space Station and Starlink updates as well. Now, speaking of the Starlink project, this week the website began accepting full addresses instead of just zip codes. You can check all that out, of course, from starlink.com. This indicates to me that they are getting very close now to selecting early beta testers in specific areas. If you've already signed up for updates on Starlink, head back and make sure that you've also submitted your address now. As stated by the emails that have been received by many of us, the Starlink private beta begins this summer with a public beta to follow. If you are signed up for updates, Starlink will then notify you if testing opportunities become available in your area. Some interesting conversations are now starting to occur, and Viv here sharing some of these images saying UFO on a stick, aka Starlink user terminals, looks beautiful. And these images were actually found by others first in the source code for the website, so a bit of a sneaky little find there. Elon Musk replied here reiterating some early facts about these terminals, saying that they have motors to self-orient for an optimal view angle and that no expert installer is required. It's just plug in and give it a clear view of the sky. It can be mounted in a garden, a roof, table, or pretty much anywhere as long as it has a wide view of the sky. I'm interested to know actually if these motors will be continually tracking or whether they will just move a little from time to time. You would think that something constantly tracking would wear out those motors quite quickly, so I'd bet that they would only need to move every so often. Now, the reason I'm so excited about the Starlink project is that we have the potential here to create a truly global network accessible by almost anyone with the appropriate equipment on hand. Being connected to the internet is something that most of us take for granted. I'm certainly no different, of course, as I require this connectivity to do what I'm doing here. I sit here on a fiber connection, rarely thinking about the majority of the world that either don't have any access at all, or if they do, woefully inadequate performance and stability. Just think about this for a minute. Imagine being completely disconnected from what is one of the greatest achievements that humans have ever created. This amazing connected society that allows cheap and easy access to learn almost anything that you want. As far as I'm concerned, access to the internet has now become a critical service for all of us. This ability to connect us all is amazing and provides us with the ability to communicate, share information and stories with almost anyone instantly. If we could provide easy, affordable education to anyone in any country, and if we could connect and help billions of people in remote locations inexpensively access the internet, this is an amazing thing. Now, we've got more to talk about with Starlink and other topics, but as we talk about online learning here, a huge thanks goes out to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community that will help you build on your creative skill set in a whole range of topics. There are thousands of inspiring classes to help you expand or start fresh on almost any creative endeavor. Only a few weeks ago, I made a big decision to finally move from my existing video editing software to Premiere and After Effects, and there were classes such as Advanced Video Editing here by Jordi Vanderput, which had me up to speed so quickly barely anyone noticed the smooth transition I made between one video and the next. Of course, video editing is the microscopic tip of the iceberg with what is offered. You can learn cutting-edge skills in illustration, design, photography, freelancing, and loads more. Skillshare is perfect for creatives and lifelong learners, and whether you're a tinkerer, a beginner, professional, or a full-blown master, you will find incredibly valuable learning opportunities here to increase your skill set. These inspiring classes are made to fit your schedule, with most being under 60 minutes, allowing you to easily fit this into your life at any pace without a problem. It's also incredibly affordable at less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. Huge thanks go to Skillshare for their support of my channel here, and if you would like to help support me and would like to give it a try, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to follow the link will get a 2-month free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. The link is in the description below. Now, although the next Starlink launch has recently been postponed, there has already been a massive headway, of course, into setting up this network. There are now well over 500 Starlink satellites already in orbit and being prepared for more extensive testing. Of course, over time, we know that Starlink is proposing an initial 12,000 satellites to be launched in upcoming years, and there has been talks, of course, of future constellations of 42,000 satellites or so. Regardless, this technology we are talking about here is completely unique and new to the human race in that these satellites are very low altitude compared to satellite connections currently in use. This will make performance a whole lot better than what has been experienced so far with this type of satellite connection. Now, Starlink is preparing to offer these new broadband services first in the northern United States and Canadian latitudes, and then they'll be rapidly expanding to global coverage of the populated world. Originally, of course, SpaceX had been hoping for fairly substantial coverage this year, but I think it's fair to say at this point that the launch frequency has been just a little slower than planned. As always, we need to account for a little Elon time here, which is generally a little more optimistic than reality. But given what we've seen with the Starlink deployments over the past 6 months, the preparation for the network looks to be going to plan. So yes, over time I've had no shortage of comments about Starlink not being feasible for third world areas, as they don't have the funds to pay for such a device, along with the current undisclosed plan costs. But this is really not entirely true. Community groups can still adopt and share access in these areas. Even if services are spread out sporadically, this still offers opportunity to utilize this new technology in areas that would certainly have no such access. That is a game changer alone. Another heated set of comments I get on this topic of Starlink, of course, is space debris and the associated Kessler effect that could be caused by adding such an extensive network around the Earth. For those of you that may not be familiar with the term, the Kessler effect or Kessler syndrome is essentially a scenario where two colliding objects in low Earth orbit generate more debris, which then collides with other objects. A debris cascade could then, of course, run away to the point that the entirety of low Earth orbit is an impassable array of junk. This could, in essence, render space activities and the use of satellites in specific orbital ranges difficult for quite some time. Now, this is where the altitude for the Starlink network is really important. The lower the satellites are placed in orbit, the less time needs to pass before they will naturally slow down due to the tiny amounts of atmospheric drag still present at these altitudes. It is a very small amount, but there are still atmospheric particles continually bombarding anything that is orbiting low around the Earth. The International Space Station, as an example, orbits at an altitude around 400 kilometers or 253 miles, so still quite low. A tiny amount of atmospheric drag causes it to slow down continually, and every once in a while it needs to orbit raise with a little help, as we see in this clip here. This is demonstrating the gradual thrust provided by the Progress M29M spacecraft back in 2016. Astronaut Tim Peake here filming from inside at the time of the orbit raise to demonstrate this. So anyway, the point of this is that even if there is space debris, in most cases it will naturally re-enter within several years. At higher altitudes where space debris could remain in orbit for many decades, it is a much bigger problem. So the lower that Starlink network is, the better it will be if any satellites become inoperable. And those Starlink satellites orbit at around 550 kilometers in altitude, just a little further out than the International Space Station. Now, on to other news. We saw the launch of a classified payload for the National Reconnaissance Office from NASA's Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. This mission, dubbed NROL 129, used a Minotaur IV launch vehicle standing 78 feet or 23 meters tall and made up of 3 solid fuel motors from decommissioned Peacekeeper ICBMs, as well as a commercial solid rocket upper stage. This is built and operated by Northrop Grumman, and it's a very cost-effective and flight-proven launch option for customers. This can launch payloads up to 1.7 metric tons to low Earth orbit, and just look how rapidly it takes off the pad and curves immediately over. This is due to the ridiculous thrust-to-weight ratio that the rocket has. This thing hits Mach 2, or around 2,470 kilometers per hour, just after 30 seconds or so. That is insane. To just compare, the Falcon 9 doesn't hit that speed until around 90 seconds into the flight. So yes, there was only the coverage of the initial launch, and then that was the end of the stream. Also on Friday, July 17th, NASA organised the Space Launch System stage adapter to be loaded onto the Pegasus barge at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. This is the last piece built in Alabama to be sent to Kennedy Space Center in preparation for the Artemis 1 mission to the Moon. This is the section of the vehicle that connects the core stage to the cryogenic propulsion stage. We also got to see Bob Behnken and Chris Cassidy venture outside the International Space Station on their second spacewalk to complete power upgrades. Speaking of Bob there, the Crew Dragon return date looks to be set, with Jim Bridenstine tweeting out yesterday that NASA are targeting an August 1st departure of SpaceX's Dragon Endeavour spacecraft to bring Bob and Doug back home after this historic mission. We should be seeing splashdown there on August the 2nd, assuming the weather is fine and no other delays occur. Can't wait to see Crew Dragon return. Now, going back in time a little, this week was the 41st anniversary of the undignified return to Earth of Skylab over parts of the Indian Ocean and Western Australia. Let's just hop into a time capsule here and go back to the beginning. May 14th, 1973 saw the launch of America's first space station in the form of Skylab, which used a modified third stage of a Saturn V rocket. Now, using leftover Apollo hardware from the cancellation of the final 3 moon missions, a 2-stage version of the Saturn V rocket lifted the uncrewed station into orbit, and this was the final mission for the Saturn V booster. The Saturn 1B would go on to take over future launches of crew to and from the outpost itself. May 25th, 1973 saw the first crew sent to the station itself. Charles, Paul and Joseph spent 28 days on board, setting a new record at the time. Unfortunately, Skylab suffered some serious damage during the launch, losing both of its micrometeoroid shields from the workshop section and one of its solar panels. Other panels were also jammed, so sadly the first crew spent their time fixing the outpost as opposed to future crews who conducted the much more useful science and observation tasks. To stop the station overheating, they had to undertake one of several spacewalks to install a sunshade and undertake other repairs. There were crewed missions in July 1973 and a final expedition in February 1974 before the station was retired, as it was never intended to be resupplied. The final crew used the Apollo Command and Service Module to lift the station's orbit by around 10 kilometers, which would keep it going until the early 1980s. The sun, though, would ultimately seal the fate of Skylab, as increased activity caused more atmospheric drag than expected due to changes in the expansion of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, there were plans to boost Skylab's orbit once the shuttle program was underway, but delays there meant that Skylab was unable to be saved. Its fate was sealed at that point, and on July 11th in 1979, Skylab entered the Earth's atmosphere, breaking up over the Indian Ocean and parts of Western Australia. Around 300 kilometres inland at Balladonia, with a whopping population of 9, they saw debris raining down over the area, including the local hotel. Then President Jimmy Carter called the owners to apologise. Meanwhile, in the true light-hearted Aussie style, the Esperance Shire Council issued the US state government with a $400 fine for littering. Now, NASA never paid, but in 2009, radio host Scott Barley of California's Highway Radio put out the call to make good and ponied up the cash and paid the fine. So yes, funny little bit of history there to end the video today. Now, quickly, a huge thank you to my amazing patrons here. I simply could not do what I'm doing here without you. Your generous support has allowed me to continue increasing the time I can spend on this content, and I can't thank you all enough for that. Further help just allows me to do even more. So if you like what I do and would like to join our awesome patrons here, head to patreon.com/MarcusHouse. You can interact with me more directly via the included roles in Discord. You can check out some exclusive patron-only content, and you can also have your name listed right here like these other incredible people. A massive thank you, of course, to my quality control squad here for helping me research and proof the material in these videos. If you're interested in these topics and would like to be involved, follow me on Twitter and do get in touch. In the tile in the bottom left today, we have my video last week talking about Starship, Rocket Lab's recent launch anomaly, and interesting news on OneWeb's satellite network. In the top right is my latest video, and in the bottom right, content that YouTube has selected from my channel just for you. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.